welcome back. My name is Morgan. This is my channel, Pisces Paperbacks, and today I'm going to talk about all the things I read in April. Yes, that's what month it is, and I'm going to start with my Owls wrap-up. I have my Owls, list of Owls books here, and then I have the rest of my books over there, so I am just going to jump right in. I actually read 18 books this month, which is really good. It's the third highest I've ever read, which is like really nice. I was hoping to read a few more, but it's fine. I just haven't read anything like the last 2 weeks unless it was on like the weekend, which is really disappointing, but I just gotta get back into the flow of things. That's what I'm hoping to do next week. So let's just get started. For the Owls, I successfully completed 9 of the prompts, which is like really good. I only had to do, I think, 4 for journalist and 7 for Hogwarts professor. So I have successfully qualified for both of those. I'm sure I'd qualify for like other careers too, but I don't feel like combing through and seeing what I can do. So I'm just gonna go through in order of the prompts what I read this month. The first prompt is for arithmancy, and that is to read a book outside of your usual genres. For that, I read Educated by Tara Westover. This is a nonfiction memoir about a woman who was raised very religious in kind of like, her dad was like a doomsday prepper almost. So it's her memoir of discovering education and like formal education once she got to college, and how education kind of influenced her relationships with her family and her relationship to religion and faith. I quite enjoyed it. I think I only gave it, I only gave it around 3.5 stars. I did like it, but I didn't get that emotionally invested. I also feel kind of weird like rating someone's life experiences. I think the thing that really brought it down for me is that there wasn't enough discussion of her relationship to faith at the end of the book. Religion and education were very much like talked about next to each other over the course of the entire book, and then by the end, it's been several years since the events of the book, so I would have just liked maybe a paragraph or two in the last chapter talking about, you know, what are her religious beliefs now, how does that influence her, things like that. But on the whole, I think it was well written and definitely worthwhile to read. Next up is astronomy. This one is to read a book mostly at night, and for that I'm going to use The Sum of All Kisses by Julia Quinn. I started reading this book last Saturday. Oh, there's some construction going on in my neighborhood, so if you can hear it, I'm very sorry. But I started reading this book after dinner last Saturday, and I read it until 1:30 in the morning that night. So I definitely read all of this at night. I loved it. This book is about Hugh Prentice and Sarah Plinesworth, and Hugh had gotten into a duel a couple years ago that, well, ruined his leg, so he now walks with a limp, and the other man in the duel was forced to flee the country, and the man who fled the country was Sarah's cousin. So Sarah kind of blames Hugh for like ruining her cousin's life and ruining her life, and so this book takes place a few years later. 2 of Sarah's cousins, including the one that had to flee the country, are getting married like in back-to-back weekend weddings. So this book takes place over like those 2 weeks where Hugh and Sarah are forced to spend time with each other, and they're like realizing they might like each other a little more than they thought they did, and I gave it 5 stars. I loved it so much. This book makes me so happy to think about. Objectively, I do have some issues with it. I think the end was really rushed, and I think that there wasn't really like, this is one of those books where the relationship is the plot. There's like the internal conflict and the external conflict, and this book is definitely focused more on the internal conflict, whereas the external conflict ended up being like really stupid, and I kind of hated it, but I am gonna put it to the side because I just love their chemistry so much. It was such a good time. The next Owls prompt that I completed was for Care of Magical Creatures, and that was to read a book with an animal with a beak on the cover. For that, I read The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I gave this 4 stars, which is the rating that I had given it years ago, I guess. I still stand by that. I think this book is, I don't mean to tell you what it's about, so I'm not going to. I think this book is, O.W.L.s is playing over there very loudly. Don't mind her. This book is incredible. It's well written. It's fast paced. It's consistently interesting and engaging. My problem is that for some reason I really remember this like book scene for scene, like every single thing I remembered. So it wasn't like that shocking to me as I was going, and I was able to like maintain this emotional distance. So that's kind of one reason that it stayed a 4-star for me. I definitely think that it's an iconic book. Like, I do think that people should have to read this. It's like, not have to, but it's like a modern classic, YA classic. And I loved it so much. But even when I was obsessed with it in middle school, it was never like my favorite thing I'd ever read. So I definitely feel like 4 stars is like good for me. That like suits me very well. Up next is Charms. This was to read a book with a white cover, and for that I'm using The Chalet by Tara Sumi. This book is a smutty novella about, and it's not even just a novella, it's a novella that's like after the 3rd book in a series. So I jumped in not really knowing that, and then I got in and I was like, oh, this is like an interlude to a plot. So it was a little weird. It was about the marriage. It was the book was the wedding and honeymoon of 2 characters who had previously gotten together in another book in this series, and they had like a BDSM relationship kind of thing. I thought it was fine. I think I gave it, looking at my spreadsheet, it seems that I gave it 2 stars, and now that I see that, I do remember this book was like, the writing was fine, except in all of the sex scenes where it was like the most cringy thing I've ever experienced. I just thought the characters were like weird, and it was like a fine, but it wasn't good, so 2 stars is like where it's gonna be. Next is Defense Against the Dark Arts, and for that it was to read a book set on or at the sea or about the sea, and for this one I read Into the Drowning Deep by Mira. This book I gave 3 stars. If you don't know what it's about, it is kind of like a sci-fi horror book about mermaids. That's like the pitch, and it follows a character whose name I don't remember at all, and her sister died on this first expedition to the Mariana Trench to kind of do a mockumentary about mermaids, and she is a marine biologist, or something more technical than that, but generally she's a marine biologist, and she's kind of dedicated her life to trying to find out what killed her sister. So she gets invited to go on this second expedition to go out to the Mariana Trench, try and figure out what happened, and to see if mermaids are actually real. And the crew of this ship kind of, you know, bites off a little more than they can chew. I generally thought this book it's really pitched as a horror. I feel very strongly that it is a sci-fi novel with a horror overtone, which I definitely think changes the expectations of the book. Most of this book was like scientific explanations for what was happening with brief interludes of, I keep saying the word interlude, with brief interludes of action, and I think those action scenes were really, really good. I would love to see this book translated into, what are you doing? I would love to see this book translated into like a mini-series or a movie. I think it would come across like visually, it would be killer. But as a book, I don't know if it like really went there for me. There is diversity among the crew, and I really did appreciate that. There are 2 deaf characters and 3 characters who use sign language. There is the main character is queer, and her love interest is a woman, and the love interest has autism, and so it was a really cool cast. I did like that, and I loved the twist at the end, but overall this book was a little bit disappointing for me. Up next is History of Magic. For that, it was to read a book that features witches and wizards, and I'm gonna go with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I read this a couple weekends ago, and I'm honestly obsessed with it. It's all I've been able to think about. I don't need to tell you what it's about, but I will tell you the score I gave for the individual books. So for the first section, it's called The Fellowship of the Ring, and I give it 3 stars. It is the longest of the 3, and it was the hardest to get through. I definitely think that it like does its job really well as setting up for this such an expansive world, such an expansive story. I think this book does, oh my god, Elsa, I swear to god, what are you doing? It does a really good job setting up for like the world building that J.R.R. Tolkien like clearly dedicated so much of his time to. Okay, I need to deal with this. One thing about The Fellowship of the Ring, though, is that it was definitely the most boring and least action-packed of the 3 books. Clearly, that's because it's the first book in basically a giant book that was split into 3 parts. So it's all the exposition. and you can't really come back from that, like, energy-wise. I did like it, but I gave it 3 stars. And then I gave The Two Towers and Return of the King 4 stars each. So I definitely like Return of the King best of the 3. They all have their flaws, and those flaws are the paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs that J.R.R. Tolkien puts in that are like just naming names, just name dropping people that we're never gonna meet and places we're never gonna go. So that was like super boring, but overall, the experience of reading all of this together was 5 stars, and I cried like a baby at the end. I'm currently reading like too many Lord of the Rings fan fictions instead of like reading real books. I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. I think you know, is there a name for that? Like Trekkies, like Star Trek people? I don't know. Let me know if there's a name for that. The next 2 prompts are Muggle Studies and Potions. For Muggle Studies, is to read basically a book from the perspective of Muggles or a contemporary non-fantasy. And Potions was to read a book under 150 pages. For Potions, I read Theirs for the Night by Katee Roberts, and I'm going to be using the sequel, Forever Theirs, for the Muggle Studies prompt. This is a kind of 3-way romance series. Theirs for the Night is a smutty novella where a girl named Meg meets these 2 guys, Galen and Theo, at a club, and they have a night to remember. And then the sequel is kind of what happens after that when they try to pursue a relationship while Galen and Theo are kind of involved in this international intrigue. So I really loved these books. I thought they were great. Theirs for the Night, I feel weird rating again because it's a smutty thing. I liked it better than the Chalet, so it's definitely like a 3.5 maybe. There's something just like intrinsically, I don't know, I actually really liked it. Maybe it's a 4? I don't know. Theirs for the Night, I really liked. I thought it was a really good smutty novella. It got the job done in terms of like having a satisfying story arc for such a small book, but I really loved Forever Theirs. I thought it really did a good job like expanding their characters, making a complicated, complex love triangle without there being like this jealousy between them, and it was truly a relationship of people all interested in each other, which was like really cool. And yeah, I didn't like the 3rd one as much, but I'll just talk about that now. The 3rd one is called Theirs Ever After. I just thought this book there was just a little bit too much internal conflict. Again, when I talk about romances, there's internal conflict, which is within the relationship, and external conflict, which is generally like the plot. And I thought the plot itself was fine, so the external conflict was fine, went along at a good pace, but I thought the internal conflict was a little bit too fraught for me. They start off the last book in this trilogy, an established relationship, and I would have just liked for them to be a bit happier, but that's just like a personal preference. I know that a lot of people really like the angst up until the end when there's a happy ending, so I did really like it, but the last one was my least favorite of the 3. And then the last prompt that I completed was Transfiguration, and this was to read a book that includes shapeshifting. For that, I'm going to talk about The Girl of Hawthorn and Glass by Adan Jerreat-Poole. This was an arc that I read on NetGalley, and it was about, oh my god, I forgot her name. It was about a girl who wasn't really a girl. She was a made thing created by witches in the City of Eyes. And so the City of Eyes is this witch city that kind of is in the sky above the human world, and this character's job is to come to the earth and assassinate ghosts, which is like such a cool setup. And it's like a found family situation. Like all of the characters are queer, there's like no straight people, and I loved this book so much. It's such an imaginative world, and I really love this kind of like magic system where it's not quite explained, but you can feel like the edges of it constantly moving and shifting, and it's like, but in a good way. I really liked it. I really liked the relationships. I really liked the characters. This book has such a low rating on Goodreads, and it's honestly shocking because in my opinion, there are a lot of like popular YA fantasies that have equivalent or worse writing. So like, I don't get it. But when it comes out, I think it's going to be released in June. I have to double check that. But when it comes out, please read it. It was really good. And those are all 9 of the books that I read for the Owls. Now I'm going to be transitioning. I feel like I did a pretty good job. Much better than last year when I abjectly failed, which was like devastating. Well, it wasn't devastating. I was graduating from college. I had a lot of things to do, but it was nice to like read so much this month. And I guess that's half of the book. So the other half of the books that I read this month, I'm just going to talk about now. First up is The Redpoint Crux by Morgan Shamy. I fucking hated this book. I gave it 1 star. It was another NetGalley arc, so I kind of feel bad for not really disliking a book that hasn't come out yet. But it was honestly terrible. Like, the characters, there were so many characters, so many subplots being juggled around. There was like kind of magic, kind of not. But then at the end, it was just like human testing, kind of. And the relationships were underdeveloped, to say the least. I honestly don't recommend you pick it up. It's sort of a Phantom of the Opera retelling. That's like the gist of it. So I don't recommend it. I'm not going to really talk about it anymore. The next book I read was The Ruin of Evangeline Jones by, what's her name? Julia Bennet. This was, again, another NetGalley arc. I quite liked this one. I thought it was a really good romance. It follows a guy who has just inherited a dukedom, and he is kind of not obsessed with, but one of his hobbies is basically exposing frauds, like mediums and people who speak to the dead, exposing them as frauds. And he decides to try and expose Evangeline Jones, who has become very popular, and through this kind of deal they make to see if he can trick her into exposing herself as a fake, they sort of fall in love. I quite like this one. I gave it a 4 stars. Now that I think about it from like a distance, I do feel kind of neutral about it. I can't remember. I remember I really liked the ending and the conclusion that the author decided to go with, and that was really nice. I really liked the chemistry between them. I thought the sex scenes were fine. The second sex scene was definitely better than the first one, but overall it was a pretty good, solid historical romance, and I am glad that I read it because now I have another author I can go to if I want historical fiction, which is like all the time. Historical romance is my jam. Up next, I read another really short smutty novella called A Pinch of Sugar by Jessa Kane, and this is basically a like Paul Hollywood inspired smutty novella. I saw Chelsea Dowling read it, and I was like, I'm not gonna put it on Goodreads, but I'll read it. I'll check it out. It's like 60 pages. And I didn't like it. It was like full on. The premise is that the main character is surprised by getting put on a show for bad bakers. And it's not Paul Hollywood. They changed the name, obviously, but it's like that kind of character. He is a judge on this baking show, and he kind of like pursues the main character immediately after the show stops filming, like the episode is done. And it's like a one-night stand type of situation with like daddy kink, but not like power play daddy kink, like actual daddy kink. It was like very strange, and I was not really a fan. I found it very cringy. So like it got the job done for what the book was trying to do, and I definitely think that Jessa Kane achieved her goals, but I wasn't into it. And I gave it a 3 star because of that. Like, I didn't really like it, but it did its job sort of situation. Next, I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I'm obsessed with this book. If you didn't see my Reading Rush vlog, this is basically the only book I read for the Reading Rush. It is about Linus, Mr. Linus Baker. He works for the department in charge of magical youth, and he gets summoned by upper management to go on this like secret assignment where he is going to basically visit an orphanage on a remote island and like inspect it and see how the guy who runs the orphanage is doing. All of these orphanages are for like magical children, and the special thing about this one is that one of the kids there is the Antichrist. So it's kind of like a found family book. This book is kind of weird because technically it's an adult fantasy because the main character is 40 and like that's really the only thing that makes it an adult fantasy. It's written in a way that's very kind of like light and fairy tale-esque. It comes across very like a dry sense of humor, but also this sense of fantastical wonder. I loved it. I think that this book is good for like anybody who wants to pick me up. It's truly like the most wonderful book to read right now when you're just trying to escape like what's going on in the world. It's also like queer. Linus falls in love or kind of develops a relationship with the man in charge of the orphanage. I don't remember his name. Arthur Parnassus. This book is so sweet. I loved it so much. I gave it 5 stars, but I do see objective flaws with it. But I think that anybody who reads this will be able to see past those flaws for like the charm and true like love and joy that this book is. Jumping from this to a book I hated, Dark Prince by Christine Feehan, 1 star. And if I could have given it less, I would have. Actually, I would like to say I gave Redpoint Crux 1.5 stars. This is a 1-star book. It's my second 1-star of the year. I hated every single moment of it. I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want you to read it. It's awful. It's like a vampire urban fantasy romance. Yeah, no. And then the last thing I want to talk about is Love Bites by Lyndsay Sanz. This is the second book in the Argenau family series. It's a vampire urban fantasy romance. This one, though, opposed to this one like takes itself extremely seriously, and it's like whatever. This book kind of really plays with the idea of like vampire romp. It makes fun of the idea of vampires and like vampire flicks and all of that. And I really liked it. The setup for this one is that there is a vampire who keeps dying and turning up in the morgue, and the woman who works the night shift in the morgue keeps going like, didn't I see you last week? Until she's accidentally turned into a vampire. And then like they fall in love, because that's all these books are. I really liked this. I think I gave it 3-4 stars. I just looked on my spreadsheet and it says I gave it 3.5 stars, but I'm definitely gonna bump that up to 4 because I have nothing but like good thoughts about this. I really liked it, and it makes me excited to read the rest of the series, which is really good. That's what it's supposed to do. And it's just cute. I mean, I just love some vampires meeting their like fated mate. I love soulmates. That's like my favorite trope. Kind of embarrassing, but I'm not ashamed. That is all of the books that I read this month. I think overall it was a pretty gosh darn good month. Like most of the books this month that I read, I think I liked quite a bit, which is really nice. How did I do on my O.W.L.s TBR? I read 1 of the 4 books that I mentioned in my TBR video, so, you know, not like great. So, you know, I did the best that I could, and honestly my best was pretty good this month because I read 18 books and I liked a lot of them. So let me know if you've read any of these books, how you felt about them, if you liked them, if you didn't like them, if you agree with what I said, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye!